Hey everyone, hope you guys are enjoying Monster Hunter in whichever fashion you're choosing to play it as. And today I wanted to follow up a second Monster Hunter Now leaks video, and this one we're going to be focusing more on the weapons that are going to be added as part of the next wave of major updates that the game will be receiving. If you have been following my videos regarding Monster Hunter Now leaks, you already know all of the 15 or so different new monsters that they're going to be adding in as we make our way to December, and essentially that December update will have a massive haul of new monsters being added in, and that's part of those 15 aforementioned ones that we already talked about. I'm going to be leaving a link in the description below if you didn't necessarily watch that video, as I go over every single one of those monsters there. Today though, we're going to focus more on the weapons as more information has begun to trickle out. Once again, huge shout out to MH_Datamine for providing us some of these details, but he cannot necessarily take all the credit since other people who begun to look into the game fast as well have been able to get their hands on more information, specifically on the 4 new weapons that are going to be added in. We say new because they're essentially not part of Monster Hunter Now as of right now, but of course they are not new to anyone who's been playing Monster Hunter for quite a while. There's 14 playable weapons in the main franchise, I believe only 6 of which are available there, so this is going to bring us a little bit closer to that 14 number. We are expecting it to basically get to, I believe, 10 out of 14 weapons will be part of the game by the end of this massive update, which we should be expecting around December. But first and foremost, if you hadn't necessarily been paying attention, Niantic is not doing a very good job when it comes to kind of like keeping this information away from people, which I found it interesting to begin with, since during one of their latest email newsletters back in late September, they sent out a couple of newsletters where they were talking about players to prepare themselves as you arm yourself with new equipments to hunt formidable monsters. And alongside the image that they attached, which you should be able to see on the screen right now, is, of course, if you look very closely or not close enough, you should be able to see that there's another weapon there that is not currently part of the weapons there available. Of course, we have sword and shield, we have the great sword, we have the bow, we have the hammer, we have the light bow gun, we have the long sword, but there is also dual blades in there as well, a 7th pair of weapons. Of course, again, officially there's only 6 weapons in the game. Dual blades showing up there is no mistake. Yes, indeed, dual blades are going to be making their way into the game, and Niantic themselves screwed up the pooch here and basically kind of revealed the weapons themselves. Now, when it comes to the actual people who have begun to look through the game codes, a lot of this became available as part of the Black Diablos update went live, that entire Black Diablos event that took place. A lot of information began to kind of like trickle into the game's files themselves, and miners began to look through them, and we ended up getting the confirmation that yes, indeed, dual blades are making their way into the game. Now, we don't necessarily know when they're going to be added in, whether they're going to be trickled in, kind of like some of the monsters we already spoke about in the last video, or they're going to be saved altogether to be dropped in all at once for the December update. We don't have confirmation on that. Obviously, that will come with time, but as of right now, we don't even expect them to be part of the October roadmap, which I spoke about in a separate video, link in the description below, as I spoke about everything Niantic is doing as part of these updates throughout October. The second weapon after dual blades we expect to be added in there is, of course, lance. Now, this one is going to be a little bit more divisive because it's probably the less exciting of the lances, but it's one that should have been there all along. It is one of those slower, more powerful weapons, but at the same time, one of those that, you know, it should just have been there from the get-go. It's one of the original weapons, if I remember correctly, and is different enough than the original weapons that are already there. Again, hammer, sword and shield, great sword, light bow gun, long sword. You know, those weapons are mostly relatively mid to fast weapons. Lance is a little bit slower in that regard. Dual blades to that degree are extremely fast, some of the fastest weapons in the game. But lance is a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical. Even hammer in that regard is slow, so they didn't really have anything more when it came to more slow weapons, and lance probably should have made the cut right at the gate, but we now know that it will. Another weapon that is also going to be added in, again, timing aside, we don't necessarily know, is the Charge Blade. Now, this one is going to be making a lot of people very excited because Charge Blade ultimately is one of those weapons that is very divisive. Does it, really kind of like show out, stand out? Are we going to get the original launch version where, the files kind of like discharges are extremely broken and powerful? We don't necessarily know. Are we going to get the newer, slower, not necessarily, so powerful version of it, kind of having to charge its way up into getting stronger files? We don't necessarily know that either. Maybe they'll come into some sort of middle ground, but it is one of those swappable, switchable, different stance weapons. It has the sword and shield version of it. It has the united version, which of course looks like the big axe, if you will, which, the switch axe is not part of this update. We're not going to be talking about the switch axe here, but for me personally, I would have found it more exciting if they decided to add that one in. But Charged Blade is going to be making its way into the game, and I do think is a relatively popular weapon, just slightly underpowered at the very least in newer versions of the game. Therefore, a lot of people do not necessarily gravitate towards it all that much. Lastly, the 4 out of the 4 new quote-unquote weapons being added into Monster Hunter Now is, of course, the gun lance. Now, this one is going to make, I know, a very specific crowd very, very excited. Gun lance is one of those internet, social media popular weapons, but when you actually get into the game, and I've said this many times, I hope you guys don't get mad at me for this, but I've said it before, it's one of those very popular picks weapons when it comes to like, social media voting and stuff like that. But in reality, not a lot of people play the gun lance, or at the very least, it just doesn't necessarily seem to be that way. Maybe there are more players out there, but even Capcom themselves said when it came to the Rise and Sunbreak kind of tallied of popular weapons, gun lance was relatively near the bottom. So it was one of those weapons that, yes, indeed, there's a big audience for it. I'm sure there's a couple of fans out there of certain relatively big Monster Hunter YouTube channels that propagate gun lance propaganda, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily all that much of a powerful or popular weapon when it comes to actual in-game experience. But I'm very glad that you guys who are big gun lance fans are going to be able to get your hands on it for sure. Gun lance making their way into the game. I'm very happy about that. Dual blades, I said this from the get-go. I was shocked when I got to see the first original 6 weapons when Monster Hunter Now's official weapons lineup came live, and I was shocked that they just didn't add dual blades right out of the gate. Those weapons are extremely popular. They should have been there from the get-go, but of course they're going to try to make up on it now. Charged Blade and the only real sus one here for me, a little bit questionable. Why this one over Switch Axe? But I understand it. They're trying to, cater to their audience, trying to get the popular ones out there. Things like Insect Glaive against Switch Axe. Hunting Horn is going to be really interesting in the way that they decide to add Hunting Horn. We don't necessarily know what they're going to try to do with that. And then, of course, Heavy Bowgun. How are they going to handle that as well? How are they going to try to differentiate Heavy Bowgun from Light Bowgun in a game where you're already just mainly focused on just standing still as a gunner? You're not really moving around all that much except to dodge and attack. So Light Bowgun already plays like Heavy Bowgun. So it's just going to be a more powerful version of a Light Bowgun. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they choose to handle going that forward. But yeah, that's pretty much the 4 main weapons that we're expecting. One which Niantic decided to kind of like spoil themselves, if you will, if you want to put it that way. The other 3 which were found in the game's files, all after the Black Diablos kind of update that went live. And we're expecting, of course, the other 4 to eventually make their way. I would personally, and this is my own speculation aside, I would find it much more interesting if they decide to add weapons that have been available in other versions of Monster Hunter. I'm talking Tonfas here at the very least. Adding them ahead than other weapons that we're kind of expecting. That would kind of surprise people at the very least and bring something, to the fold that we wouldn't necessarily be expecting. It would give a lot of players who maybe are kind of looking at Monster Hunter Now side-eyed. They're not necessarily taking it all that serious because it is a mobile game and it does have its own, trappings and stigmas attached to it, to kind of like reconsider and say, hey, they're actually adding weapons that, sure, they're part of the Monster Hunter story, but, they're being added in here this time around, and they're going to be a little bit different than they were before, so maybe I should consider playing that game. I think that would probably go a longer way than just bringing back weapons that we already have seen, but they're going to do that anyways. So, not only that, but of course, new monsters that are going to keep people excited. No new original monsters yet. Do keep that in mind. Link in the description below for my previous leaks video regarding the monsters. and the October lineup, and now we have the weapons. I might make a separate video regarding the new skills and stuff that has been found, but that's kind of like more tedious information and more niche, if you will. Tedious isn't the right word. A niche certainly is. So I might tackle that in a separate video in the future, but for now, if you're brand new to my channel though, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.